Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, February 8th, 2018. All managers are present except Manager Shackleton. No matters from the floor. I note that we have information items in East Auburn Stormwater Pond update, so I thank Anna Brown for that. The consent agenda, I haven't approved the agenda yet. Two things I'd like to add to the agenda. At 11.3, Resolution 18-012, and at 11.4, 325 Blake Road decommissioning issues. Are there any other changes to the agenda?
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Olson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Manager Rognes. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda. Approval of the minutes of January 25th, 2018 is the only item on the consent agenda this evening. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognes. Those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? President's report. Just noting that Manager Shackleton is assigned to the February CAC meeting and Manager Rognes March. On the Blake Road Joint Working Group, we discussed it in committee, and the suggestion is that Managers Loftus and Miller and I be the board's assignments to that joint working group. And if that's, everyone has approval of that. Do I need a motion, do you think, Chuck?
No, you got the authority.
I just had the authority. All right, I appoint Loftus, Miller, White. And we have our first meeting on the 27th. Also, for anyone who uses Dropbox, if you have too much data and you'd like to have it reduced, Sarah Bamani can be helpful with that.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Have you ever dropped a box, though?
The only thing that drops is the package at my door.
There you go. Nothing to worry about.
Jeez.
Did I need to add an item for district administrative transition? I do. 12 point. It's on there. Okay, 12.9. Okay, we're good. Next item up is the permit, item 10.1, permit 17576 for Lake Road, Highway 7 to Spruce Avenue.
Thank you. Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. This evening I'm bringing forward permit 17-576 for Blake Road improvements within the city of Hopkins. Excuse me. The permit is before you this evening for consideration because the city of Hopkins is requesting a variance to the district's water body crossing and structures rule for the required 100-foot setback to directionally bore underneath Minnehaha Street. So this evening, I will walk you through the project background, the rules that are applied to the work, highlight the variance request, and then conclude with a staff recommendation. So to show you where we are in the district, Blake Road is within the city of Hopkins, generally in the highlighted yellow area. Zooming in on that a little bit closer, the work is proposed south of Highway 7 to Spruce Road. And kind of explain the project a little bit more. The area highlighted in green here is Hennepin County right-of-way, which extends from Highway 7 south to Excelsior Boulevard. And then the blue portion here south of Excelsior Boulevard is owned by the city of Hopkins. The portion owned by Hennepin County has been identified as a county turnback project, and the city and the county have executed an agreement that allows the city of Hopkins to perform the work, and eventually this portion of the road will be turned over to the city upon project completion for the long-term maintenance. Additionally, there's a very small portion of work proposed within the MnDOT right-of-way at the corner of Highway 7 and Blake Road, which is shown in red. The purpose of the linear reconstruction project is to upgrade the roadway and associated utilities to support forecasted redevelopment in the area. and also to improve safety for pedestrians and bicyclists along the corridor. Overall, the road will be reduced from a 5-lane undivided highway to a 4-lane divided highway, which will also have trails on each side, a dedicated center turn lane, and medians throughout the project. Overall, the project will result in a 0.57 acre reduction in impervious surface. Per the district's stormwater management rule, linear reconstruction projects that decrease in impervious surface are exempt from stormwater management treatment controls. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here to kind of highlight where I'm going to be talking throughout my presentation. So as mentioned, there's some work done within the MnDOT right away at the corner of Highway 7 and Blake Road, where there's a proposed culvert to be replaced that comes in contact with a wetland. Additionally, 2 culverts are proposed to be replaced along Minnehaha Creek east and west of the Blake Road Bridge. And then in that same area, there is where they're proposing to directionally bore a sanitary and water main line underneath the creek. So I'm going to, in large, be referring back to kind of these 3 same images throughout the presentation, and just wanted to kind of show you within the project corridor where they are located. So zooming in on the proposed culvert replacement, kind of explaining why all of the rules are triggered. So because the culvert comes in contact with the wetland, it triggers the district's water body crossing and structures rule, and then also triggers the wetland protection rule. The culvert proposed to be replaced east of the Blake Road Bridge comes in contact with the bank of Minnehaha Creek. Therefore, it triggers the district shoreline and stream bank stabilization rule, and it is also within the 100-year floodplain. The culvert proposed to be placed to the west does not actually come into contact with the bank, and therefore is not analyzed under water body crossings or stream bank stabilization. However, this culvert is also within the floodplain and was analyzed under the floodplain alteration rule. And then zooming in a little bit more on the proposed horizontal line underneath the creek, just want to call out here, I did move north a little bit to be able to get the full snapshot here, so I just want to point out that north is to the left now. The Cottageville site would be at the bottom of this diagram, cold storage on the bottom left. And so just highlighting a little bit, they are proposing to install both a water main and sanitary line. Try to pull it out in that green line there. The bore pits are located within those purple boxes. The northern bore pit here is proposed 100 feet from the bank of the creek. However, the southern bore pit is proposed 50 feet from the bank of the creek due to the presence of an existing high-pressure gas main that is located approximately 90 feet away from the bank of the creek.
What are those symbols on the map in 3 or 4 different places? They look like barricades on a dead-end street.
The squiggles?
Can you repeat your question?
These.
Those are, Manager Mill, those are traffic control signs.
They're what?
So this is just pulled from the site plan. So this diagram shows a lot, and I'll go into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, but I want to know what the...
I believe it is a traffic control road
No,
closure
it's not.
sign.
It's sitting on the...
There's signs that there'll be like detour signs that they'll put up on the road, so it'll be keeping people out from turning into Park or turning into Lake Street.
So it does symbolize a barrier.
Yeah, it's the physical barrier.
It looks like barrier. Is
Yeah.
that what it is?
So I think that kind of shows it goes, this
Right
will
there.
go over here.
Oh, okay,
So-
fine, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
right,
just
it
really
says
confused.
It's not in the
road
right-
closed
yeah.
up here,
Yeah.
that's what it is. So it's
Okay. Boy, that's a lot of detail on that.
There's a lot of detail on it. So getting into a bit more on the rules that are triggered, the district's erosion control rule is triggered for any project that proposes land disturbance of 5,000 square feet and or 50 cubic yards of excavation or fill. Because the project will disturb approximately 12 acres, the rule is applied. This is just a snapshot of one of the sections of the corridor. The same erosion control measures are presented throughout the entire project. So the city has provided stabilized construction entrances as shown in the red circles here. They have provided bio logs, which are shown in blue. Additionally, in some areas, they are proposing silt fence. For the portions where the project does cross the creek here, they're providing floating silt curtain, and they have also provided inlet protection throughout the entire corridor. The hatched areas here show immediate temporary erosion control measures. The hatched area are erosion control blankets, and then the kind of gray area, as shown in the light green boxes, are hydro mulch. Concrete washout will be contained on the truck, and final stabilization will include 6 inches of topsoil and sod. So the proposed erosion control plan meets the district's rule. So next, moving into the wetland protection rule. The district's wetland protection rule is triggered for any project that proposes an impact to a wetland. Additionally, the wetland buffer provisions of the rule are triggered when the water body crossing and structures rule is triggered. 2 wetlands were identified within the Lake Road corridor. The first wetland, as referred to as wetland A, is shown here. This is on the Cottageville Park parcel. Is wetland fringe to Minnehaha Creek. Wetland A is not proposed to be impacted, is outside of the construction limits, and is outside of any proposed temporary or permanent easements. Wetland B, as shown here, is within the MnDOT right-of-way. MnDOT is the LGU for WACA for wetlands that are within their right-of-way. They have sent a confirmation notice of decision that the proposed temporary and permanent impacts associated with that culvert replacement meet the exemption under de minimis criteria, and therefore mitigation is not required. The district's wetland protection rule recognizes the exemptions within the Wetland Conservation Act, and therefore no mitigation is required under our rule as well. The city of Hopkins does not own land ownership rights, nor has obtained any permanent easements that would allow them to plant or maintain wetland buffer that would be upgraded up from the wetlands. Therefore, no buffers are provided with this project. And then concluding that with that criteria, the district's wetland protection rule is met. So focusing in on the shoreline and stream bank stabilization rule, the district's stream bank stabilization rule is triggered for any project that proposes disturbance to the bank of a shoreline or bank of a water body or water course. This project, as I kind of mentioned earlier, the replacement of the east culvert of the Blake Road Bridge does come in contact with the bank of the creek and will disturb approximately 30 linear feet. I tried to pull out the bank of the creek, as shown in my little green sketch here, has eroded up to the culvert because of the existing conditions. I was actually on site fall of 2016 to verify the wetland delineation. So this is the current state of that culvert there. As you can see, there's currently riprap that is placed that's not functioning as it should, and would be considered out of compliance with the district's structural criteria. The top of the bank, I tried to roughly mirror it for you here. This is not to scale, but is approximately where that has been delineated. And so the work to replace this culvert will disturb 30 linear feet of the bank. Per the district's stream bank stabilization rule, maintenance of an existing improvement is not required to submit a erosion intensity score, since this has an existing, would be considered an existing improvement. It does have riprap in place. They weren't required to submit that intensity score to justify the stabilization practice. Therefore, it is proposed to be stabilized with approximately 12 cubic yards of riprap with filter fabric underneath, which will be at a less than a 3-to-1 slope, and is in conformance with the district's structural stabilization criteria. With those dimensions and the way the riprap will be installed, the project as proposed meets the district's stream bank stabilization rule. Excuse me. Moving into floodplain alteration. As I mentioned, both of these culverts that are proposed to be replaced are within the identified FEMA 100-year floodplain, which is at the 902 elevation contour west of the bridge and the 901 elevation contour east of the bridge, which I couldn't really get a better figure for you guys on this, but I tried to highlight where they are on here. So since there will be land disturbance below the 100-year floodplain elevation that was triggered, both of the culverts will have riprap placed at the outfalls. The western culvert will be replaced at about 16 cubic yards of riprap placed for energy dissipation, and then as I just mentioned, the eastern one will have about 12 cubic yards. Per policy, as passed by the board, riprap placed below the projected 100-year floodplain elevation does not require floodplain mitigation. Therefore, the 28 cubic yards of riprap that will be placed are not proposed to be mitigated for. All of their land disturbance associated with replacing these culverts will not result in additional fill, and therefore there will be no decrease in storage capacity of the floodplain in this area. So with that, the district's floodplain alteration will is met. Moving into water body crossings and structures, I'm going to kind of break it up into two aspects. I'm going to first focus in on the culvert replacements and how that meets the rural criteria, and then move into the directional boring underneath the creek. So overall, there largely are three elements of the project, the two culverts and then the boring. So starting with the culverts, the culvert in the MnDOT right away and then the culvert east of the Blake Road Bridge trigger the rule. Per the district's rule, structures that come into contact with the bed of the bank of a water course or water body must demonstrate a specific need. Both of these outfalls have erosion at them, which is causing sedimentation downstream, therefore demonstrating a specific need to replace them. Additionally, the culverts are proposed to be replaced with the same pipe material and at the same invert elevations. However, the diameter of the pipes will be increased. Therefore, the city had to show that they would maintain hydraulic capacity, and specifically that there would be no increase to the flood stages upstream or downstream. Overall, the project will result in a net reduction of impervious surface, and they're not changing the current drainage pattern. Therefore, rates should be decreased to these outfalls. In addition to that, they did submit hydraulic analysis that was confirmed by the district engineer that there would be no changes in the hydraulic capacity upstream or downstream for the replacement of the culverts. They also must show that the proposed brick represents the minimal impact solution. They did submit two different design alternatives, one being a no-build scenario, which does not meet project goals nor address the existing conditions. And the other one that was analyzed was looking at vegetation stabilization at the outfalls instead of hard armoring. That alternative was rejected because it was modeled that the velocities of water discharging out of these pipes were not appropriate for vegetation stabilization, and the long-term stabilization would require riprap. I would like to mention that even though the western culvert of Blake Road Bridge does not actually trigger the rule, we did look at it maintaining hydraulic capacity and looked at what was coming out of this pipe as well, as a due diligence. Water quality is proposed to be improved from the existing conditions because of the erosion and scouring that is happening. The stabilization with the riprap will stabilize the bank of the wetland and also the bank of the creek. In addition to that, there are proposed pre-treatment sumps for all three of the culverts as another stormwater management practice. Navigation will be maintained from existing to proposed conditions, as there's no bridge proposed to Blake Road Bridge itself, and there's no proposed change to the cross-section of the Leona Creek. walkway passage shall be preserved from the existing to proposed conditions, as these are outfalls that convey stormwater. And then, as listed in the recommendation, a condition of recommended approval, the city and the district will execute a maintenance agreement for the culverts. So the proposed culvert replacement meets the district's wide body crossings and structures rule. Moving into the proposed boring underneath the creek, I'm going to kind of follow the same analysis as I did for the culverts. Minnehaha Creek is a public water, therefore they must demonstrate that the crossing meets a public benefit. The upsizing of the sanitary and water main lines are to meet the public need for the forecasted redevelopment in the area, so they have shown that it is a demonstrated clear public benefit. They did also provide two alternatives to the locations of the bore pits, which once again are in the kind of magenta purple boxes. One alternative being a no-build scenario, which does not meet the project goals nor meet the public need. And other alternatives that were considered were to move the bore pits outside of the right-of-way and potentially doing maybe like an open trench. Both of those would actually cause more impact to the surrounding landscape and potentially cause more environmental impacts than doing it boring within the right-of-way. To directionally bore underneath the water course, you must provide at least 3 feet of clearance between the top of the pipe and the bottom of the bed of the creek. The sanitary line will be installed 3 feet below the bed of the creek, and the water main will be installed 5 feet below the bed of the creek. Additionally, sanitary lines have to provide a plan in the event of a line breakage to avoid a sanitary discharge. The plans have incorporated a redundancy in valves, shown in the location of the red circles here. So in the event of a sanitary line break, they shut off the pipe and stop the discharge into the creek. Then finally, as I mentioned, the northern bore pit is proposed 100 feet away from the bank of the creek. However, the southern bore pit is proposed approximately 50 feet away from the bank in which they are seeking a variance for. This is due to the presence of an existing high-pressure gas main, which is located approximately 90 feet away from the creek. The board may recall when this permit came before them last year. And so that is what they are seeking, the city is seeking a variance for. So all other criteria besides the location of the southern bore pit meets the district's water body crossing and structures rule. So moving into the variance request, as the board is familiar with, to request a variance, the applicant must demonstrate that to meet 5 criteria for the board to consider. First being that these are special conditions to the property, and the presence of that gas main is a special condition to this property. The hardship was not created by the applicant. The gas main was installed and directed by Certify Energy, as the board may remember last year. That granting the variance will not serve as a convenience. The city has explored other options for putting the bore pits, as shown in their alternatives analysis, and the bore pits within the right-of-way do represent the minimal impact solution in regards to natural resources, and therefore would not be merely serving as a convenience to the applicant. That also falls into exploring other options, and that the intent of the rule will still be met. So the intent of the 100-foot setback from the water course is to preserve the stream bank and to ensure that there is no unintended erosion or sedimentation into the water course or water body. The city has incorporated redundant erosion control best management practices around the bore pits to ensure that the erosion will be kept on site and be limited. Will not be allowed to get to the creek in the event of a high rain event or something of that similar nature. reconstruction of Lake Road triggers the district's erosion control, wetland protection, shoreline and streaming stabilization, floodplain alteration, and water body crossing structures rule, and has requested a variance for the 100-foot setback for the south fourth head. Staff recommend approval of the permit application with conditions listed in the report, and I do apologize, it's just like typo on this slide, but the conditions would be to provide the district with proof of authorization to work outside the Lake Road right-of-way, including those permanent temporary easements, submission of a maintenance agreement for the water body crossings and structures, and then identify the contractor responsible for maintaining the erosion control plan. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve the permit and the variance?
Madam Chair,
Mr.
the board may wish to vote on the variance first and then on
First.
the permit.
All right, good enough. Is there a motion to approve the variance?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker, thank you. Any discussion or questions? You've outlined the reasons for us very well, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With the variance approved, may I have a motion to approve the permits, including the conditions as stated and the variance just approved?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The permit is approved.
And you keep on showing that picture of the boardwalk. Will somebody please clean the leaves out?
Hey, they're natural. Item 11.1, Resolution 18010, and we have Ms. Christopher.
We're going to try to keep leaves out of our watershed. I know there's not going to wait. Shovel it out, shovel this up first. Just push them in the
Madam
water.
Chair, managers, tonight staff is requesting authorization to submit a letter to the Board of Water and Soil Resources regarding the watershed-based funding pilot program. Staff provided an overview of the program and its implications for the district at our January 25th EC meeting. And following that discussion, the committee asked that a letter be brought back at this meeting for board consideration and authorization to submit to browser. Staff coordinated with legal counsel on the drafting of the letter, which outlines the district's concerns related to the program and also recommendations for changes like considered as this eventually gets turned into a permanent program. So the concerns, there's kind of 5 general areas discussed in the letter. One is just related to the process used to develop the pilot, and our feeling that there was a lack of transparency and opportunities for the district to engage and weigh in on that process. Another concern is the fact that the funds are being distributed on a county basis rather than a watershed basis, which we understand to be kind of fundamental tenet of the program. Third, another concern is just the lack of incentives for prioritized, targeted, measurable projects. So really the program leaves it open to these county groups to determine how the money is distributed, and it seems that the tendency is to then simply divide it based on area, tax base, those kinds of things, rather than it really being based on resource needs and outcomes. Fourth, we discussed the lack of guidance as a concern. There's really been, aside from a few frequently asked questions document that just came out earlier this week, there's really been little to no guidance for LGUs in terms of who is convening these groups, what the decision-making process should be, what the involvement of cities should be, and the criteria and framework that might be used to allocate the funds. So it's really just leaving a whole lot for the LGUs to figure out in a short amount of time, which we found to be, or feel is not very realistic or reasonable. And finally, the last concern we discussed is the long-term implications as developers propose to shift the the bulk of the clean water funds to this model over the next several years. And I'll make sure that we kind of agree with the way this program is being set up before more and more funds are kind of put into this model. So again, then we outline recommendations to address some of these concerns. The main ones being that it be watershed based rather than being divided on county boundaries, that it be set up in a way that incentivizes the best projects, essentially keeping it competitive, but perhaps making some modifications to address some of the concerns with the past competitive program. And the main one there being to establish a project priority list similar to the Public Facilities Authority uses to provide more stability and predictability of funds, which we understand to be one of the main concerns with the competitive program. And then finally, we're requesting that a clear process be laid out for how the program is going to be evaluated and how LGs are going to be engaged through that pilot phase to make decisions about the permanent program. So staff's proposing to send this to the Bowser Executive Director, copying other pertinent staff and the board members on the Central Region Committee. And we also noted that we would like to share this with other metro watersheds as well and MOD, so that we can be starting to kind of coordinate and get a better understanding of how kind of what other watersheds and then what they're thinking about this program and get some kind of common recommendations.
Is there a resolution?
Yes, and to get this on the table, is there a motion to approve Resolution 18010? Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller. Are there questions or comments for Ms. Christopher?
Nice job.
Yeah.
Letter's great.
Very complete.
Back.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 11.2, Resolution 18011.
President White, managers, excuse me, Resolution 18011 authorizes the administrator to execute a contract with Springstead Incorporated to assist the district in implementing its human resources plan. It also clarifies the delegation authority. I'll cover that in a minute. I think the board's up to speed. I've briefed the board and committee on the status of the HR plan implementation. And I think I summarized hopefully adequately the assistance that Springstead would provide through this contract. It's really in three primary areas. They're going to review job description to proof the district's work. They'll review the classification to do the same. And then they'll take that work and they'll go out to the market and look at comparable organizations, benchmark positions, and pull those in to make sure that the district in its restructuring and review of jobs and classifications remains market competitive, which is something that's timely anyway, given that we generally intend to do that every 5 to 7 years. In terms of the contract amount, we're looking for authorization to execute a contract of $30,900 with a not to exceed amount of $33,300. The contingency dollars are outlined in your packet. They're on an average of about $160 per hour for any additional work out of scope for a total of about 15 hours. That's in the event that there's some additional back and forth needed in pockets on one or two job descriptions here or there, because we are trying to move fast and we don't have every single detail locked down. While that might be unusual for soft skill contract like this, we think that's prudent. And then there's some cost built in there as well for individual follow-up or any potential appeals and needed dialogue back and forth with individuals within the organization. So that's where the numbers come from. That's the work that we're looking to get done by Springstead. And then you'll see there's a be it further resolved that the board is really affirming that the authority that rests with the administrator to implement the HR plan and follow through on all of this work is being delegated to me, so that both the board and staff and myself have clarity in our pending transition on who's responsible for moving all this work forward.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Loftus, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson. Questions for Mr. Whisker? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
11.3 is Resolution 18-012. And Mr. Heyman?
Good evening, Chair White, managers. You have before you Resolution 18-012, a draft that was provided earlier during committee that would authorize the transfer of funds for operational expenses for 325 Blake Road from the capital account to the operational account that is managed by CBRE as agent to LaSalle Company.
I realize that I skipped over the report from the committee. Did you want to report on the committee's recommendation? Okay. Is there a motion to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Robbins, any further questions or discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We've also added 11.4 through 25 Blake Road decommissioning issues. Mr. Heyman.
Chair White, managers, we are seeking authorization to provide Chair White with the ability to authorize an emergency transaction if testing comes back for some of the mercury components with the ammonia that has been hauled off site. That authorization would allow for a decision to be made when we receive the testing results on Monday at 3 p.m. It's something that would be a decision that would likely require us to take action immediately rather than have the ability to call a special meeting or get the board to convene to make a decision at that time. It's unknown if we'll need to, and I'm working with Chris, Ian, and Wank Associates to develop a scope of work, and I'll have a draft contract, everything ready to go in the event that it's necessary. We're requesting that the amount be not to exceed $150,000 that Chair White could authorize up to in the event that that's necessary.
So moved.
I would suggest that it be myself and the administrator, since that's how we approve other things that are. Mr. Holtman.
Madam Chair, board members, I could offer a proposed motion.
Oh,
if you
good.
like.
Okay.
My motion, better not.
I didn't recognize your motions.
Oh,
There you
okay.
go.
It
No,
wasn't.
no problem.
The motion would be to authorize the administrator to execute contracts relating to the disposition of materials from 325 Blake Road decommissioning, not to exceed in aggregate $150,000 with consent of the board president and on advice of council.
And district administrator? Board president and district administrator?
The authority is given to the administrator with the board president's consent.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
I'll move
Right.
that.
Thank you. Is there a second down here? Any discussion or questions? Manager Olson?
Question. This might be for Chris. To what extent do we have to, if she gives approval, do we have to get permits to do start? Or
You'll have to get permits to dispose of the waste.
to dispose of it, but not to start
To
doing it?
actually take it.
Okay. So we don't have to have approval and then start going into a waiting cycle. Okay, thank you.
Manager Becker?
Mr. Heyman, for the record, could you briefly describe the nature of the emergency?
Certainly. Mercury was discovered within the ammonia system at 325 Blake Road after the ammonia gas, or ammonia liquid, pardon me, had been removed from the system. It was unbeknownst to the refrigeration consultant at the time that this particular system in the cold storage facility contained mercury. That release was contained, and we went into a mercury audit, which was to investigate the site as well as track down the ammonia liquid that had been removed, which we've done, and now contain that until we receive the testing from that material, which is a 3-day wait and is currently in Iowa under test. So.
And the emergency is to move material if it's identified?
That is correct. The emergency would be to immediately move the material and begin the remediation activities. The disposal that would be necessary for the hazardous waste.
And it's on someone else's property.
It's currently on 2 properties,
Mhm.
yes.
Any other questions? Mr. Holtman?
Madam Chair, just to clarify, there's not been any sort of release, and so the term remediation may not be precisely correct. Everything is in sealed tanks at this point.
Thank you. Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 12.1 is the district administrator,
Before he begins his report.
certainly.
I was just looking at the management plan in the summary. And in the front of it, it had probably 40 or 50 people that were involved as advisors or consultants or technical reviewers, et cetera, that participated in it. And, of their own time and effort. I mean, they were a lot of municipal employees and others, but they came and did the work and did fine work. And I think as a minimum, we should send out a colored printed copy of the summary to them so they have it for their files. And CAC members and the TAC members and et cetera. So that recognizing their contribution as well as the former board members that participated in the development of the plan.
Do you know, Mr. Whisker, if that has happened?
It has not happened. We can do that. A colored copy is so many, and thank you to everybody that helped us create it.
Great, that would be really
Thank you,
good.
good suggestion. Now, may I continue?
You're free to be present.
Item 12.1, district administrator transition. As you all know, Manager Loftus, Manager Miller, and I were appointed by the board to work with Mr. Whisker and with Mr. Smith as well on transition issues. So I'll just give a quick rundown here, and then I'll let you guys weigh in if you think I've missed anything you'd like to cover tonight. Our discussions are progressing well, and our first order of business was to confirm that Mr. Whisker was willing to take the job, provided we can work out all the agreements. And he said yes. So tomorrow's retreat, we'll have a full board discussion on this issue, as well as other agenda items. We are talking about the need for mutual understanding between Mr. Whisker and the board around such issues as the existing situation, what the job is, the importance of getting the culture right, the impact on the organizational structure, framework for accountability, and mentoring and growth resources as needed. So that is, the real quick thumbnail summary of what we'll be discussing in more detail tomorrow. But I'd be happy to take questions and ask if you have anything you'd like to add at this point.
I think it's a great summary. We had a terrific meeting. And, I felt a good level of beginning of understanding of the transition and what's needed.
Good. Well, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, we'll weigh in.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Item 12.2, Ms. Damjanchich, Big Island Nature Park easement and Orono planning update. It's a board discussion item.
Good evening, President White, managers. Tonight, staff would like to provide an update on recent coordination regarding the Big Island Nature Park conservation easement held by the district and implementation of its associated management plan. Provide an update on recent planning work undertaken by the newly formed Big Island Committee and the City of Orono staff regarding improvements it would like to make to Big Island Nature Park. Provide a review of the concept plan in its current phase, its use and potential funding for the proposed improvements, and how the city has prioritized and ranked this work for implementation. And then also run through an approval process laid out by the city that incorporates district approval in that process, and then also plan for next steps in determining the appropriate level of district management. Just as a refresher, as the board is aware, the district was engaged last summer by the Big Island Planning Committee, and staff attended a discussion regarding some potential improvements. At that time, staff advised of the easement terms and also allowable actions underneath the approved management plan. At that time, we also became aware of some violations that were undertaken within the easement area. And since that time, district staff and city staff have worked together to address some of those violations. These events highlighted a need for district staff to work more closely with City of Orono staff and the Big Island Planning Committee to fully understand the easement and also fully utilize the management plan in determining suitable management actions. In an effort to synthesize a number of ideas regarding future improvements to the park, the Big Island Planning Committee expressed an intent to develop a mini master plan for the park. And the city staff worked with a consultant to do just that and finished up that concept plan process in December. And then just last week, Mr. Erdahl and I attended a city staff meeting where the consultant presented the concept plan, and also a park commission member was present to kind of go through the concept plan itself, and also to get a little bit of a thumbs up from the district staff that what was planned was generally in line with the easement and the management plan as well. And I can kind of step through some of the pieces of the plan itself. So the plan itself considers 7 different improvements. These are ranked and prioritized in kind of an order that the city would like to undertake them. First and foremost, the city would like to look at converting some of the existing foot trails to ADA accessible trails. Those are kind of marked in these heavier orange lines here. Those are existing trails at this time. They're just kind of simple footpaths, not paved or anything. The city would be looking at covering those trails with crushed granite or limestone, making sure that the grades were appropriate for ADA accessibility, and also the width would be suitable as well. The city is also looking at installing a single restroom facility. They would kind of turn this area just above the dock area into sort of a very simple visitor center area where they would install either a pit toilet or a plumbed toilet there. And then with these improvements, the city is also looking at providing for some sort of park-wide safety measures and security measures. And what they're kind of looking at in those terms is trail cameras or security cameras so that they could be aware of any issues that were going on site. And then fourth, they're looking at refurbishing an existing building. There's a small, just very simple building right here. They'd look at refurbishing and restoring so they could have very simple visitor center with interpretive signage and trail maps and that sort of thing. It's become aware to the district and the city as well. There's a continuing issue of vehicle use on the property, which is illegal. It's especially a concern in wintertime when there's snowmobile access and that sort of thing. So the city has identified a number of locations marked with these blue boxes where there are kind of entry points onto the island. They've placed some trail bollards at those areas so that they could prevent vehicle access. Another thing they're considering is a veterans memorial, because this had formerly been a camp for veterans. They'd like to do a simple boulder and brass plaque somewhere kind of in this recreation area here as a memorial. And then lastly, these kind of red circles here are areas that are being considered for overlook areas, like a simple picnic site, bench or shelter, that sort of thing.
On the legend, it shows the Watershed District's conservation easement, but I don't see the legend on the map. I mean, I don't see the...
Yes, that was some feedback that the district offered to the consultant when we met last week. So the black dashed line here is just the recreation area section of the whole conservation easement, but we'd like them to add a dotted line around this entire area that shows the entire scope of the conservation easement.
So the entire gray area, we have an easement
Yes, all this area here, but then
over.
yes,
And there's 2 kinds of easements?
there's one easement, but it's kind of separated into 2 different sections. So this dashed area here in the middle, as well as this small area down here, are considered recreation area, where there are some allowed uses that are more expanded than the rest of the site, which is just really protected natural area.
Okay.
Manager Loftus?
The second priority for the single restroom facility, where would that be?
The city suggested somewhere in this location here. There's an existing septic leach field here that they could connect to if they'd like. But because they know this is kind of the main access point to the island, they'd like to do a restroom there where it'll be most used.
close to the existing facility, you mean?
Yep, the existing leach field is right here, and so that probably listed restroom facility here, like this primary kind of trail node, just up from the back there.
Way back behind the current little house that's there.
I should point out too, something I didn't mention is this trail here does not currently exist. It's a switchback trail. So when the folks who do need accessibility within the trail system will be able to use this switchback trail to get back to the restroom facility and the visitor center also. This is the city's approval process they laid out, which does incorporate Watershed District approval. As I mentioned, in late January, we met with Orono staff to discuss the concept plan. And then later in February, Orono staff will take the concept plan back to the Big Island Committee, get their feedback, and then staff have asked Watershed District staff to attend, and then Orono council members also asked 1 to 2 MCWD managers to be involved. Then later in March, Orono staff will take all of that information to the Orono Park Commission and get input there, as well as incorporate a public meeting into that meeting. And then with all of that kind of combined information, the plan will be further refined. Then district staff will come back to the board and get general approval for the plan. And then later in April, the plan will be taken to Orono City Council.
Manager Miller.
Well, you know, all these plans are fine, but it's our easement. Where do we approve it? Where's it subject to our approval?
Manager Miller, managers, so.
The only reason I bring this up is because it was, our contribution was so diminished in the newspaper. Like we cut a couple branches off, like we're a bunch of old ladies that were concerned about an apple tree. And they failed to mention what they did to the shoreline, in which we spent several $100,000 preserving it so that so the island didn't end up all washed into the lake. And it was diminished as just goofy. And it seems like they are just going to plow ahead with a plan with a committee of the city and their park commission, irrespective of our approval.
March
18th.
Yes, Manager Miller, managers, the.
No, it doesn't say approval. It
It
presents
should,
the plan, but it's not subject
it
to our
should read
approval.
to say approval, yes.
Huh?
It will come to the board for approval.
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, the communication that we've provided to city staff at this point is generally what they've provided within the concept plan does fall within the easement and the management plan.
Okay.
But that we would be, seeking the board's approval for that.
Now, this plan is going to come to us. Is it some kind of a semi-verbal thing, or they're going to identify actual trees and stuff that they can cut down, or?
Yeah, the plan will have that really dialed in. They, they are really in a concept plan phase at this time, and I wanted to also mention there's not any existing funding for these park improvements. Part of the advantage of having a concept plan in place by the city is they'll be able to use that to seek grant funding, so we'll have something tactile that they can speak to. But there is no existing funding at this time, and this would have to be a slow and phased approach.
Okay. I have a concern that as long as they're seeking grants, that we have to approve the grant request if it's going to be doing work on our easements, to make sure that it's not violating any of the provisions of the easement.
That's a suggestion we should bring up, we should talk about. You have more presentation, I think, for us?
Just a bit more.
Okay.
Yes.
Come back.
Oh, it wasn't me, it was Queen.
Let her go ahead, as far as I'm concerned.
Just quickly, just wanted to kind of touch on some next steps. As you've been discussing, we'd like to get some direction on the appropriate level of commitment and engagement by the district moving forward, and then to assure you that as we continue to coordinate with City of Orono staff and the Planning Commission, that we'll be providing updates to the board. Take any additional questions?
The manager, Miller, has made a suggestion that we should be involved in the grant also. in seeking the grant, so that's.
If it's spent on our easement, yeah.
Certainly, they couldn't do anything without our approval, but might save trouble with. the
Well,
grant.
see, here's the problem, they get a grant, and then we're a bunch of tree huggers that have no concept about recreation, and, because they got the money to spend and we're stopping them. Whereas if we participate or have to approve the grant applications for improvements on our easement, we'll know what it's being spent for, and not be pressured into an approval later.
Mr. Whisker?
Along those similar lines, I just sidebarred with Lori here. Approving the concept plan is, a really preliminary step in the process, and there's a lot of deviation and things that can happen between concept and design and funding and construction. And I think we should probably engage the city in a conversation that's memorialized in writing on what our level of involvement is in all of those project development steps, so that we're vetting the design and that we have a level of oversight in the construction that they're doing over there, so that the contractor doesn't accidentally do something over here, or the design doesn't deviate materially from the concept, and then we hear that, oh, the design was based on the concept and you approved the concept. So I think we should really treat this as a gated process. The way that they've laid it out so far is they'll involve us in a concept review. There's been a preliminary level of staff discussion. That concept has to get dialed in. It has to come back before the board for evaluation for how it complies with the easement conditions management plan. You have to pass a resolution approving it, but then there's a whole bunch of other steps before you start getting out there and doing work, and that's something that we should probably, I would recommend that we explore, unless the board thinks differently or has a better idea.
We all, I think, received the email from Councilmember Seals inviting us to participate. So one question is, do we want to have policymakers at that point in their process, the city's process? I don't think anybody volunteered. I don't think anybody contacted them.
I think it's appropriate for staff to represent us.
And I concur with that, because the issues that we would have would be technically oriented, not aesthetic or whatever. It has to do with the correctness of either design or placement. So our staff is more than able to cover that. And having board members there implies that we're part of that design. That's really not our.
I share that concern.
That's not our venue. It's not our purview.
Manager Miller?
Yeah, normally I wouldn't be that concerned about it, the goodwill of the city council, but when they described what they did, and diminished the impact, it's like we're silly people being concerned about these things, when that was much more beyond what they described. So I want to make sure that that the public's interest from the rest of the Watershed District and the state of Minnesota is represented by our involvement in the entire impact on our easement, because there was a lot of state funds put in this thing and a lot of the district funds put into it to bring the island to where it is now, and it wasn't anticipated to be a big recreational activity. So I think we've got to stay attentive to our to the easement.
We have a management plan too, of course, and that does talk about a Veterans Memorial and maybe some trail upgrades and access. I don't remember everything's in there. Mr. Whisker, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a question, I think, more than an observation. Am I correct in observing that the email the organization received for level of policymaker engagement, how does that align with the staff process that's been laid out? Was that a level of engagement that was contemplated in the staff framework for review and approval?
Yes, generally,
Okay.
we have that, we receive this concept plan, present it to you, kind of give it a general overview and a general alignment with the easement, yes or no. And then the approval process would be that once the concept plan was more refined, there was more detail associated with it that would come back to the board for approval.
I was
Well,
talking about
the email.
the side process.
The email said that they invited staff and a couple of managers
Two managers.
to join their staff and council member and talk about, like, the meeting you guys went to would have had policymakers at
And
it
it was,
under her
yeah,
suggestion.
it was my impression that city staff wanted to coordinate directly with district staff.
So I guess my observation is that at some level, the process that's been outlined is probably malleable, and we should track it closely and talk to them about approval authority over design and construction oversight.
Good.
Mr. Commander Becker?
This is a substantive question about the plan. If you want to go down the lane that Mr. Whisker was going down, you might ask someone else to question. Okay. It appears to me that all of the development is within the bounds of the recreation area, with the exception of the boulders and the ADA trails, some of which are outside of the recreation area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I would suggest that you contact city staff and see whether the ADA trails are in their ADA plan. And if not, ask them to amend the federal plan. And these will qualify easily for it. The federal plan, you have to provide at least one example of each recreation experience in the unit of government in a disabled, accessible fashion. And these are the only island trails in Orono, is my guess.
I think you're right. I think you're right. So are we all in agreement that we would like to have our staff represent us in the next phase of this discussion with the city manager office?
I think I would agree with that, but I would caution that that's been what staff has been doing, and I think there's still a gap, unfortunately, based on some of the public comments in the newspaper, or the way it's portrayed is, unfortunately, they're still not understanding the passive nature of the park and the reason the district values shoreline vegetation and erosion control, and that we don't see it as a few branches being cut. It's completely different. So while we've had that level of involvement to date, it appears, based on some of the somewhat flippant comments, they're not hearing that from us, or the right people aren't on their committee that they're trying to set up. So if that's the communication channel that's been set up, it's so far been ineffective, in my opinion. Not that that's your doing, but just that whoever is representing their council on that, which I believe is Victoria who came, maybe that isn't getting back to the full council. I'm not sure what the barrier is there, but it isn't effective at this point. You know, the comment that it's just a few branches, it isn't. There's a significant biological and ecological benefit and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on shoreline stabilization. And to say that nothing's been done in the last 10 years, that was years of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and all of the garbage that's been hauled off of that island. So I think there's just a general lack of understanding, or trying to minimize the missteps they've taken and not wanting to own those. And maybe that's all fine and good, we can't change that, but I agree staff should be our representative on that committee, but I don't want us to be disillusioned to thinking that the communication is reaching all levels as it's portrayed to be on that committee, because it hasn't to date. And meeting and hearing that there's going to be, in August when you met with staff and heard updates, it wasn't communicated where they'd be clearing and all the specifics of it. So I think there's still communication challenges.
Sure.
Not that that's on our staff in any way, but I generally concur that it should be staff that represents us, but there's still some level of it not working the way they have it set up, so.
Manager Becker?
Did the newspaper reporter contact us?
You interviewed President White.
I worked with our director of communication, and we provided information to them, and the mayor's quotes were interlaced in the article.
Have we communicated our feeling about the article?
Mm-mm.
We're doing it right now.
We may want to do that.
There were some inaccuracies also, stating, for example, that the easement didn't cover the entire park was one of the misstatements.
Well, my experience is if you communicate your feelings about poor articles, you get a better response the next time. So it might be worthwhile to talk to our communications manager and see what she says about getting in touch with the paper.
Thank you. Mr. Whisker?
A couple more observations. I don't know how helpful they are. Along the way, with this moving its way through this review committee and then the board and Parks Commission and council, it seems to me that a clear engagement strategy from the board at all those, from this organization at all those points would be helpful. That's to say, I think at a minimum, staff should be at the Parks Commission and the council. My understanding is that to date we haven't had, I could be wrong, a presence at City Council. Have we been to the City Council
No.
meetings? So, so in terms of the communication gap, that's one way to handle it in the process that they've delineated. And then the only other observation for the, just for the board to kind of weigh in terms of responding to their request is, if you want staff to engage, I guess the balance point is at that work group, if you have a policymaker involved, this perceived level of buy-off, implicit buy-off on the concept plan is balanced against you not attending and then this potential communication gap. That goes both ways. If you're there and staff representing you, we can be very clear about expectations. So I'm not recommending anything one way or the other on that, but just acknowledging Manager Loftus's point. And then I would say at all these other stages, we should have a very strong presence at Parks Commission and City Council. We should be standing up and speaking, not relying on this work group to communicate our message directly to Parks Commission and Council.
Agree. I think it's a good point.
So we can work that out and send you something or bring it back on February 22nd. I don't remember what the timeline was for when that group meets.
Yeah, it's not really dialed in quite yet, but yeah, I'll just add to that our last meeting with with city staff was very much kind of working in that direction. They really wanted the district's involvement both at the Park Commission and also City Council. So, although this has been a little bit unwieldy and there have been lots of kind of pie-in-the-sky ideas right along the way, we really have dialed in, and they have dialed in kind of specifically what they want to do and have our engagement in that process.
Thank you. Manager Miller?
I think we consider having a public hearing on any amendments to the easement, because there's a lot more people involved than those than the city of Warrenville in their public. It's the entire rest of the lake and the Watershed district. So we if there's going to be any amendments to the easement or any impact on the easements, that we have a hearing on it.
Do you mean, if I could ask,
Well,
a hearing on the proposed concept and how it comports with the easement, or if there are proposed modifications to the easement? Because we definitely have a process for that, but they're not proposing anything that would require modification of the easement language as far as we've seen so far.
Or
As
the
far as
management plan?
Right.
As far as you've seen so far.
Right.
Well, I like the idea of maybe getting a more specific proposal for us, and I think we could mitigate the appearance of approving something by making sure that we focus on the easement and its value to us. Okay, if you can come back with something more, then that'd be great.
Sure.
And thanks for your chart here of the table that you put into the report. Appreciate it. Anything else?
So we'll bring back more detail on the 22nd.
Yep, thank
Okay.
you. The administrator's report, Mr. Erdahl.
Thank you, President White and managers. First, I'd like to draw your attention to the 2017 year in review that was put together by Natalie Mamaik and Sarah Bamani and other staff that collaborated on putting that together. So I have that in front of you. I think that Manager Rognes mentioned that it's nice to see it flat instead of folded up like you received it in the mail already. So, and then I just have a few other updates. In addition to meeting with the city staff from Orono with Laura last week, we also had a meeting earlier this week on Monday with the city of Wayzata, and I mentioned this a couple weeks ago also. They're planning some pilot program for STEM education related to their, what they're calling their Eco Park as part of their Wayzata Lake Effect program. And our involvement, I was there with our education staff, Darren Lochner, and our involvement is really to provide some resource and content, not to actually produce or deliver the programming. And Darren Lochner will continue to engage and connect and coordinate our involvement there. The mayor was there at the meeting this past Monday also, and expressed gratitude for our kind of support along the way for the planning they've done to date. They are planning on May 19th some kind of a community event to highlight the summer education programming, and we'll probably provide our mini golf course or some types of things like that for some activities at that event too that we already have. Also some updates from our research and monitoring area. We talked today about removing carp from different parts of 6 Mile in our committee meeting, and actually that's going on right now the last couple days. There's the commercial fisherman is doing the same to this winter to continue the carp removal on Wasserman Lake. This is outside of the Lessard Sam's grant program. It was already in our budget. It's a budget item for about $3,000. Last year, they removed about 2,450 carp, which was 18,500 pounds. And we haven't weighed the group right now. They're in the net and they're waiting to be hauled out when the truck arrives on Saturday morning. But Eric Fieldseth was confident that and hopeful that it would be about 20,000 pounds of carp that would be removed. That gets us closer to our kind of goal population level for that lake. So that's ongoing, and it's also a very important part of our ongoing commitment and relationship with the Lake Association there as well. Also, the Universities of Minnesota's AIS Research Center released a 5-year report that we are kind of featured in as one of their partners and a collaborator on some of the different AIS work we've done with them. This is an advanced copy that was sent to Eric Fieldseth as kind of part of that program, but we'll just kind of send that down, and that will be coming out soon, looking at the first 5 years of the research center.
Could we get an electronic version of that sent to us?
I think so. It doesn't exist yet. It's just, this is an advanced copy, so it hasn't been distributed yet, but when that is, we'll definitely distribute it through our different channels to you, and also probably as an attachment on our Splash newsletter and other things too. Also, another meeting last week, with the addition of our education staff person that's focusing on community engagement, we had a meeting last week with our lobbyist, Joel Carlson, who came in to talk to several different staff just about updates and status of some of our different ongoing efforts with the legislature, and to kind of brainstorm some different possibilities and things going forward. And kind of the next stage of that is to make sure that we connect with the Board of Managers and to see if there's any other specific legislative initiatives or advice that you have that you want to have as a focus for 2018 as that session gets underway. Also last week we had staff from Redpath in our offices a couple weeks. They're doing the field work for the 2017 audit, and that was so far that's been a very smooth, efficient process. Our staff were very responsive to answer and respond to their questions, and we don't anticipate anything but another positive audit report as a result. And then I guess lastly, there's a few things that were slated to be or actually extra to the committee meeting just prior to this meeting. And I think James was going to talk about Carver County Finance, some issues with Meadowbrook Golf Course, and also In South Minneapolis, some of the concerns about surface and groundwater issues that have been highlighted by some local residents there.
Thank you, Lars. President White, managers, as far as South Minneapolis, we'll start there. I don't think I need to provide the context regarding the surface groundwater issues. We've been sending out pretty regular project updates on a monthly basis. And that's something that Tiffany's been talking to you about too. The update here is that I informed just yesterday via the DNR that 3 to 5 residents in the Nokomis area have secured a meeting with DNR and some of the DNR leadership in areas of groundwater hydrology. That meeting, the reason I bring it up is that meeting's being hosted by Representative Wagenius on February 15th at 11 a.m. at the State Office Building. The Minneapolis, the district, and the park board have been invited. Tiffany received the invite on our end via the DNR. I've spoken with Minneapolis staff and park board staff, and assuming the board would like us there and want us to attend, I think I'll be the one attending. I talked to Tiffany about that. We've heard back that this is a meeting that they're trying to keep quite small. I think it's an opportunity for the residents to talk directly to the DNR about the level of resources that they would like to complement the work that the city of Minneapolis is doing in their diagnostic of their observation wells that they've put in. That said, I'm not sure what the board's stance is on sending me to a meeting with state representative without policymakers in attendance. You have, a liaison policy and that sort of thing. So I think I'm comfortable handling the meeting, but I wanted to let everybody know that that's coming up. And if you have any interest in attending or don't want us to attend, basically just get that on your radar because it came up yesterday and February 15th is next week, I suppose.
Thoughts, Manager Miller?
I'm perfectly comfortable having James represent us.
I also hate driving to St. Paul, sorry. It sounds like you can go.
Okay, and we'll report back, of course. So then the master finance agreement, shifting geographies here to the west in Carver County. The master finance agreement's been authorized for execution by this board, by the Carver County Commissioners. In the background, the Chief Financial Officer from Carver County had always wanted a Plan B built in to the agreement in the event that the district would default and not service its debt. That had kind of taken the place under 103B and gotten woven into Agreement Statute 103B, whereby watershed districts in the metro can certify our capital projects costs to the county. The county can choose how it wishes to pay those costs, and it can in fact issue bonds to pay for those costs. There's an interpretation by their bond counsel that when Carver would be issuing the full costs of the project, that in fact it would be able to partner with Hennepin and levy a tax over Minnehaha Creek watershed district's geography in Hennepin County to service the debt if we didn't pay. In coordination with Hennepin County and a sort of closer legal review, that piece of language that's in our agreement won't work. And the solution that the Carver County's bond counsel has come up with is something that I don't think is necessarily palatable. And in terms of the whole concept, none of these things are necessary. The solution that they've come up with is to make what they consider a non-substantive text revision to the agreement, whereby when the bonds are issued by Carver County to take out our short-term finance, at that time, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District would issue or certify a levy to both counties, apportioning the costs respectively for a 20-year term of the bonds, and then that would basically be happening every potentially 36 months, because that's the amount of time our short-term financing is allowed to be outstanding. I think that puts us in a position where we'd be certifying a special levy specifically for debt service on a 36-month basis outside of a regular budget cycle. And I'm sure we could reconcile that with our budget cycle, but it sort of subverts a number of benefits of the original structure of the agreement. So moreover, I think it's not necessary. We've had this conversation over and over and over again since the beginning. And in fact, I think their bond counsel generally agrees, and our general counsel definitely agrees, that we have promissory notes and a master finance agreement that are binding in court and obligate the use of our tax authority to service that debt. And that's a legally binding structure. Also, the way that the general obligations work, because they're backed by our taxing authority, we have no impact on their bond rating, their credit rating. So what I'm recommending is before we would bring that tax revision forward, we pursue an administrative or political solution with Carver County, that we revisit the issue with the Carver County Administrator and the board if necessary. I had the opportunity last night, I was in Minneapolis at the Park Board meeting, and I ran into Commissioner Workman, who's lobbies on behalf of the Park Board, and we covered this topic briefly, and he seems somewhat sympathetic to the issue. And I think Manager Olson and I have discussed connecting with Commissioner Malushnik to provide him an update, so there's an opportunity here in the next couple weeks to talk to him. So there's your update. We'll be off working with, I think, the Carver County Administrator, CFO, and if we can't resolve it, we'll bring that back to you and get a head nod on revisiting the issue with the Carver County Commissioners.
Manager Olson?
Would our terms exceed what they were saying was their plan B? The bit about 20 years every time?
I'm not sure what you're asking, to be honest.
In other words, let's say that there's a set of circumstances that we're not interested in. At the time that we would make that decision, should there be a problem, we could make that go away by offering something we do want that exceeds what they're
If you're asking if we've looked for other solutions.
In other words, can we make it totally useless? Can we make it obsolete?
There's really no risk and no other legal construct. I mean, I've spent an awful lot of time on the phone with their bond counsel and Lewis Smith, and everybody seems to agree that there's no risk. We're legally obligated to levy tax or a regular budget cycle to service their debt, and we will. And if we don't, they can compel us to do so through these two agreements. So adding in a whole nother construct for a Plan B, the Plan B is to enforce the agreement. There isn't a need for a Plan B. And I don't think that it makes sense for us to be building in a second levy into our budget and financing process. So we have looked at a lot of alternatives. I think what we should do is, and I have revisited the issue numerous times with Mr. Frischman over at Carver County, and this is something that I've made the point, and I made the point to Commissioner Workman, no preconditions were placed on the authorization to execute this agreement. So it's just a matter of reconciling this text issue, and I don't think that we need another level of redundancy in this situation. So hopefully they can work through that with us, and if they feel like that requires us to go back in front of the Carver County Board, we'll do that.
Okay.
Manager Miller?
I would describe this as a county snow removal process in which they plow the snow, and then they go by with salt and sand, and then they go by with a plow again, but they have a siren on it saying, "We're plowing again." You know, just calling it the fact that it has no benefit whatsoever, except the finance director thought of it. You know, well, it would just be nice. It'd be like saying, here's a bank loan, but we're not sure you'll pay it, so you got to get a letter of credit. Well, if I get a letter of credit, what do I need a bank loan for? Well, you got to have a letter of credit, but if the letter of credit doesn't work, you got to have a personal check on record here that we can cash. You know, I mean, this is just, where does it end?
So you
Because
agree-
there's no purpose for it. It doesn't do anything.
Sure.
And what it does is frankly involve every other governmental unit in the approval process, because they'll be notified every time, you know. And then they'll say, "What are you doing out in Carver County?" You know.
Special taxing.
You know, and it's not necessary.
So the suggestion is that we keep working this administratively and by talking with Commissioner Malushnik or whatever else. So
Right.
no board action is required
That's
for
good.
that.
And basically to approve the agreement that was approved by this
Right.
board and by their county board.
The main reason I bring it up is that the board's authorized us to go off and seek short-term financing proposals, and we're not going to be able to do that until we resolve this issue.
Great.
So I wanted to let you know.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then the last item was Meadowbrook, as I mentioned, is at the park board meeting last night, is an interesting, new and improved park board. We worked with Michael Schroeder, their Assistant Superintendent of Planning. They reviewed all the work that we've been doing together, our past cooperative agreements and MOUs, and all the alignment of plans and investments that we're trying to pursue in Minneapolis. And then he flagged the past work that we tried to joint venture on at Meadowbrook and the commitment that they'd made, and wanted to basically feedback from the planning committee at that point if they would support the district pursuing its project at that location. I think what I could say is there were no objections. There really wasn't any comment or questions. There were a couple commissioners that were pretty supportive and observed that we had money in our capital budget and that the park board needed to give us a signal on whether or not they were going to allow us to move forward, or they would lose the opportunity for us to partner with them and make investment at Meadowbrook. So where we go from here is we'll be back having discussions with the board about the terms and the framework for the cooperative agreement. There'll be a more comprehensive presentation back to the park board in February or March, and then hopefully end of March, if things coalesce, we might be looking at authorizing a cooperative agreement that would essentially allow the district to take control of that project and move the design, move the bid, and move the construction with only milestone check-ins from Minneapolis Park and Rec Board staff, not having to go back to the park board.
Questions? Thank you. Anything else? We are adjourned.